I first of all welcome to Congregation Sons of Israel. Some of you are visiting with us tonight. I want to first just to pay our ritual bow to the fact that today is Martin Luther King Day. By exquisite coincidence, Wednesday, the 15th, which was the actual birthday of Dr. King, was the 18th of Tevet, which was the yortzeit of Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel. And the two of them marched together in Selma and on many, many other occasions. And Dr. King was very, very vigilant about anything that smacked of anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, which was anti-Semitism essentially in disguise, and was very quick to call out, sometimes staring down his own community very courageously on that specific point. And so while we're, it never hurts to remind ourselves of why that's a major observance in the American civic calendar, and may his memory be a blessing. We are delighted that to welcome back one of our distinguished alumni. Dr. Yoni Litwok is, first of all, his first credential is the son of Steve and Nurit Litwok, although he might even quibble with that and say that he is the grandson tonight of Ziggy and Genya Litwok. Dr. Litwok was born in Israel, raised here in Marlborough, became bar mitzvah here at Congregation Sons of Israel. He is a physician and currently completing his cardiology fellowship at Northwell Health in Long Island, and his experience with the Holocaust was through his grandparents, Ziggy and Genya, and he can still recall listening to them tell their stories, and even remembers attending Yom HaShoah commemorations in our synagogue as a young child. The rest, says Dr. Yoni Litwok, he'll explain himself. And I want to be guilty of taking up the smallest part of this program and leaving the maximum amount of time to our distinguished guest, Dr. Litwok.
Thank you, thank you. No, I can turn them off.
Okay. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Logan, Mrs. Litwok, is with us tonight. We're delighted to have her as well. Braving the traffic from Long Island is not something to be trifled with. They're paying us the fullest compliment they can.
Thank you. Get the light here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. I hope everyone had a nice, enjoyable, long weekend. For those who don't know me, my name is Yoni, and I'm a member of the third generation, the grandson of Holocaust survivors. We come together tonight in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. As we reflect upon one of the worst chapters in the history of mankind, I'd like to share with you a personal story, one I've had with the Holocaust over the past 2 years, a story I've called The Quest for the Hidden Torah. When I hear the word Holocaust, the first thing I think of are my grandparents, Papa and Nana. They were survivors. The lessons I learned and my understanding of the Holocaust was through their stories. Papa and Nana were not shy about their history. They were proud of their upbringing and Jewish heritage. They spoke of their childhood, their families, their hometowns. I learned of traditions and rituals, especially around Jewish holidays. I sensed that they came from warm, loving homes. Papa and Nana shared their story often. They spoke at local colleges, high schools, community gatherings, as well as days of remembrance. Their eyewitness testimonies are documented with the USC Shoah Foundation. 2 years ago, I discovered a recording of Papa's testimony. What began as me listening to Papa tell his story became an obsession of learning everything I possibly could about my family. Over the past 2 years, I've spent countless hours on this project, and tonight I'd like to share that experience with you, as well as what I've learned along the way. There was always one story a story Papa told me that captivated me, but one that I completely forgot. One that was lost with Papa's sudden death in January of 2002. When Papa was just a teenager, the Nazis invaded Poland. As the invasion progressed, they made it to Papa's hometown, just southwest of Krakow, a town known as Gigice. A local non-Jewish resident overheard that the Nazis were planning on burning down the synagogue on the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He made Papa and a few others aware. So late one night, after curfew, Papa and a few other Jewish men snuck out and went to the synagogue. They took the Torah scrolls out of the ark and carried them to the local Jewish cemetery. There they buried the Torah scrolls, at the time believing that the Nazis would at some point leave and they'd be able to go back and retrieve them. Little did they know how tragic a future lay ahead of them. Papa always said he wanted to go back. He said he knew exactly where those Torah scrolls were buried, although he never shared more details. But he was never able to make it back. I imagine the traumatizing memories of his hometown made the thought of return painful and difficult. In fact, I even learned about the last moment Papa spent in his hometown. Shortly after the invasion, Papa and his youngest sister fled to their uncle's house in a neighboring town. After a couple days, they were low on supplies, so illegally, Papa removed his Jewish armband and took the train back into Gigice. With the help of one of his father's former employees, a non-Jewish man, he was able to gather supplies. And then later that day, while headed back to the train station to leave town, Papa was recognized and confronted by his high school classmates. They said, hey, we know who you are. We know you're a Jew. If we ever see you back here again, we will kill you. As I was saying, the story of the hidden Torah was lost. Then, about 80 years later, my parents decided to move out of the house I grew up in. As they cleaned up the house and sifted through their belongings, a recording was found of Papa telling his story. I watched the video, and in April of 2018, the story of the hidden Torah came back to life.
Our temple will be destroyed. They advised some of the elders of our congregation, of the Jewish congregation, and my uncle and a few other men went at night between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and removed all the scrolls. We had somebody at our cemetery, Polish man that worked for the cemetery, and all the scrolls were hidden somewhere in the cemetery.
I was struck by a thought. Papa was not able to accomplish his goal of going back and finding the hidden Torah. But maybe somehow I could try. Maybe I could help Papa accomplish his dream. My first action was locating the town. I remember the first time I Googled it, I typed in Gigice with J's, trying to phonetically translate my grandfather's Eastern European accent. I quickly learned that the proper spelling of the town is with a D and a Z, and that it's now a merger of two townships and is known as Jakowice Gigice. I then searched for Jewish cemetery, Gigice, and lo and behold, within a few clicks, I found a link to a YouTube video. 10 years earlier, in 2008, someone had filmed the remains of what was once the Jewish cemetery of Gigice and uploaded it to YouTube. As we watch together for the next minute or so, the music you'll hear is the original music on this YouTube video. you'll see that this cemetery is in absolutely horrible condition, completely overrun by shrubbery, trees, bushes, full of litter. Many of the tombstones are barely visible and severely damaged, but you'll notice that when the camera zooms in and focuses in on them, you'll be able to read the names of the deceased in Polish and in Hebrew. Within 15 minutes of starting this journey, I had located the cemetery. So then what? I'd found the cemetery, but how was I supposed to learn more about it? I commented on the YouTube video, asking the person who had uploaded it 10 years earlier, do you know if the cemetery is still there? 2 days later, she responded, yes, it is. It's even being cleaned now. What? That wasn't expected. I wrote back, explaining that I'm tracing my family's roots, and asked if the person knew where I could obtain some more information. Despite trying to reach this person numerous times, I never again heard back from that person. I had hit a dead end and was not sure how to proceed. I'm lucky that my father-in-law, Ira Brenner, is a psychiatrist who has specialized in the psychological trauma of Holocaust victims and has numerous contacts in Poland. Through Ira's help and a string of forwarded emails, I was connected with a local resident. This man is named Slavik Peszczewska. Slavik is one of the few Jews who still lives in this part of Poland. His family has lived in the same town, Pszczyna, for over 8 generations. They came back home after the Holocaust. Slavik is 29 years old. He's a PhD student, a historian, and a social activist. Similar to the cemetery in Gigice, the cemetery in Slavik's hometown, Pszczyna, also survived the Holocaust, but in the post-war period was neglected, and as Slavik told me, became swallowed by vegetation. In 2005, when Slavik was 15 years old, he became the primary caretaker of the cemetery, the resting place of several generations of his grandfather's family. Slavik told me that he knew from the first moment he ever entered that cemetery, he could not remain indifferent to its condition, and that hidden behind the tombstones, he wanted to learn about the stories of the buried. Over the next 14 years, culminating in 2019, Slavik was able to identify all 300 tombstones in that cemetery and completely restore it. He did all the work in his spare time and funded the costs of restoration out of his own pocket. He now provides tours of the cemetery throughout the year. Slavik says that working in the cemetery is not just to clean and renovate it, but rather to restore awareness of the existence of this important place on the Pshchina map, to restore the memories of those buried there, as well as a large Jewish community that once called Pshchina home. It just so happens that as I was first starting to explore Papa's story, unbeknownst to me, across the world in Poland, a young Jewish man named Slavik had decided he wanted to go clean up another cemetery, one that had also been neglected for decades, Papa's cemetery in Gigice. In what can only be considered a miracle, the one particular cemetery I was interested in, amongst over 1,000 Jewish cemeteries in Poland, was being cleaned and restored. In August of 2018, 4 months after I had rediscovered Papa's story, Slavik and a group of non-Jewish local volunteers spent a couple afternoons together cleaning the cemetery in Gigice. My initial communications with Slavik were via formal emails, but we quickly became friends and started texting each other on Facebook and WhatsApp. Slavik started keeping me up to date on news regarding the cemetery. He had also started writing a book about the cemetery as well as the Jews of Gigice. I shared with Slavik what I knew about my ancestors, as well as some notes I had from an Israeli relative who had visited the town years earlier. Slavik, on his own, in the archives, found all kinds of information. He found the addresses where my ancestors lived, their occupations. He found dates of weddings, the names of the rabbi that conducted the wedding. He found dates of births of children. You'll see Papa's name here. Slavik even found receipts of sales of goods. Together, I was learning more about my family, and Slavik was learning more about the Jews of Gigice. I started creating a family tree and was learning more and more about my family. Relatives that I didn't even know existed were suddenly coming to life. I started to feel that by embarking on this journey, I was restoring the lives and memories of family members that were lost. I learned about Edja, Papa's little sister, seated right in front of him. Papa is the teenage boy standing behind her. They were separated from their parents. The parents are right over here, shortly after the war started. But they were with their aunt and uncle, who they were very, very close with, Aunt Berta and Uncle Herman. I learned that Uncle Herman was a watchmaker. The more I learned about my family, the more I realized I have to go to Poland. I need to see Gigice and that cemetery for myself. This past August, 2019, my wife Logan, my parents, not sure what you're doing back there, and
Great.
we embarked on a family journey to Poland. Our itinerary included seeing historical sites and concentration camps from the Holocaust. More specifically, however, our focus was on which relatives lived in the cities we were visiting. We hoped to forge a personal connection with family members that lived or were killed in the locations we were at. We landed in Warsaw, and the following day went on a tour through the city. We stopped in front of the remains of the wall that surrounded the Warsaw Ghetto. I had written down what I had learned about different family members and wanted to share these words with my family as we stood in the cities where they lived. As we stood in front of that wall, I took out my page of notes and started reading about Adam, Nana's older brother, who was killed in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. As I started reading what I had written down, tears just started flowing down my cheeks. I became so choked up, it took me minutes to get through that paragraph I had written. I felt that by standing in a location where Adam had stood, where he had sacrificed his life for the sake of the Jewish people, I was honoring him. It was the first time I ever spoke to Adam, and the first time I felt a true connection with my great uncle. Adam was 8 years older than Nana. She called him her protector. They had a big radio in their house that was always playing music. And when Adam would come home, he would teach Nana and their sister Bronca all the latest dance moves. They were always singing and dancing together. When I was done speaking, Abba wanted to recite a prayer he had brought for victims of the Holocaust. He said one word and broke down crying. This was the first time on the trip we shared tears together. The following day, we headed east to Majdanek, a concentration camp in the eastern part of Poland. Majdanek has been reconstructed and stands today nearly the way it stood during the Holocaust. 2019, and we walked through an entire concentration camp. From Majdanek, the following day, we headed to Lodz, Nana's hometown. To this day, Nana remembers her home address, Zamenhof 19. We had looked the street up prior to our trip and discovered it still exists. We were scheduled the following day for a tour at around 11 a.m., so we woke up early and took a taxi cab to Zamenhof 19. She described it as a building on the corner with a yard outside, and that the building was 4 or 5 stories tall. She remembers their apartment was on the ground floor. The taxi dropped us off at Zamenhof 19, and there, on the corner, with a yard outside, stood a building 4 or 5 stories tall. Exactly how Nana had described it. Seeing a physical structure in front of me, one where my grandmother was born and raised in, made me realize how real the Holocaust is. Seeing a physical item that was stolen from my family. These aren't just stories or tales. They exist. They're still there today. For me, growing up, a part of the Holocaust was a story and history. But after seeing the wall that surrounded the Warsaw Ghetto and seeing the building where my grandmother was born in, I realized this isn't history. The Holocaust exists. It's there. You can see it in every city in Poland. We spent the rest of the day exploring Lodz with a guide. We passed through the location of where the Lodz ghetto stood. This was where Nana watched as her mother, my great-grandmother, died of tuberculosis. As we walked through the Jewish cemetery in Lodz, we were shown a mass grave where those who had died in the ghetto were buried. It's very likely that my great-grandmother is buried here. We again said a prayer for Holocaust victims, and I read the following about my great-grandmother, Chava. Nana remembers that her mother would prepare traditional Jewish food. Friday night, fish and chicken soup. For school, she would prepare Nana her favorite sandwich, 2 slices of bread with grated milk chocolate inside. Not an uncommon sandwich in Europe, she told me. And she would always peel an apple in a circular fashion and then rewrap the apple in its skin to keep it fresh for Nana. In the cemetery in Lodz, we also found the grave of Nana's grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, Shlomo Wolf Cohen. Shlomo Wolf was a well-known philanthropist in Lodz. Nana remembers that when he died, the men wouldn't enter their home because they were Kohens. There was a big funeral that went through the main street in Lodz, which was very uncommon for a Jewish funeral. But Nana remembers being in a horse and buggy with her sister, Bronca, and their cousins. From Lodz, the following day we headed southwest towards Krakow, along the way spending a day at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The stories we heard that day and the sights we saw can be discussed for days on end. But as I share some photos with you, I'll also share some memories of other family members that were murdered there. Ahead, on the right, over there, is building number 28, the quote-unquote infirmary. My mother's grandfather, my great-grandfather, Leo Dashinger, felt ill in Auschwitz and went to the infirmary for help. There he was killed by lethal injection. Nana's father, my great-grandfather Israel, was murdered in Auschwitz. When they were still in the Lodz ghetto, there was a period of time where Israel was taken captive by the Nazis. For 19 consecutive nights, Israel was beaten and tortured in an effort for him to reveal where he had put his money and jewelry, although none of those items existed. When Israel came back home after 19 nights of beatings, he was charcoal gray, bruised from head to toe. Nana remembers when Israel came back, he no longer spoke. He was broken. At the end of a long day, when Nana and her sister Bronca would come home, at nighttime they would put cold water compresses on Israel's bruises. They would try to find some ointment to put on his wounds, but nothing helped. There was no doctor. When the three of them arrived together at Auschwitz, they were immediately separated. Nana still remembers her last memory of her father was him screaming the names of his two daughters as the Nazis pulled him away from them. She says they took one look at his beaten body and sent him straight to the gas chamber. Papa's little sister, my great aunt, little Edja, along with Aunt Bertha and Uncle Herman. Papa had been separated from them and was working at a labor camp. He heard that a Jew in Wadowice had killed a Nazi. As a result, the Nazis took a couple thousand Jews from Wadowice to Auschwitz, including Edja, Berta, and Herman. The following day, we learned about the Jews of Krakow, and the day after that, our last before coming home, was devoted to Dzidzice. I had been in touch with Slavic, and we planned on meeting each other at the cemetery around 10 a.m. Our ride ended up taking less time than we anticipated, so we got there about a half hour early. Our driver was not sure exactly the specific spot of the cemetery, but I remember from commentary on the YouTube video that the cemetery was located across from an elementary school and near a bus stop. Up ahead, I saw a bus stop, approached the area, and noticed the clearing to the left side. I then saw a sign, one that had been recently placed by Slavic, identifying this as the Jewish cemetery of Dzidzice. From my living room in Manhasset, where I first remembered Papa's story, I was now standing in the Jewish cemetery of Dzidzice. I had arrived. It's hard to describe how I felt as I entered that cemetery. I was overwhelmed by so many different emotions. I felt proud that I had found the cemetery, that I had traveled and made my way to it, that along the journey, I learned so much about my own personal family history, as well as the history of the Jews in the Holocaust. I could feel Papa smiling down on us. I also felt complete serenity, total harmony while standing in that cemetery. The cemetery felt warm and peaceful. I felt as if the cemetery and the trees surrounding it were giving me a big hug and welcoming me back. There was a sense of belonging there. I also feel tremendous gratitude to the cemetery. I'm thankful it persevered despite the devastation it endured. This is our proof. These are our people. This is our community. We restored so many memories by coming here, the memories of an entire Jewish community. We started to explore the cemetery. It's a small area, about the size of 1 acre. Some of the tombstones still stood in their original locations, while others were on the ground, and some had been neatly laid along a wall. Slavik arrived and immediately began giving us a detailed history of the cemetery. He knew the names of the deceased, the dates on the tombstones. He could identify the time period of the burial based on the material the tombstone was made of. He knew what people did for a living, how they died. He even knew where some of their descendants live today. Slavik pointed out an area where Papa's grandmother, Sally Siegel, is likely buried, although the tombstone no longer exists. Slavik handled the stones with such care, like they were his own fragile possessions. If the stone was a little bit dirty, Slavik would gently brush it off. It was so clear how much he cared for the memories of these people. Slavik shared some stories with us of his own grandparents, and the way he said certain words reminded me so much of Papa, especially the way he said Yom Kippur. We were blown away by Slavik's knowledge, as well as his dedication to restoring the memories of these Jewish communities in southwest Poland. We spent the rest of the day exploring other parts of Gigice, where our family lived. I took this picture outside a small store we walked by. You'll notice above the door frame, it says "Never give up." And that on the door itself, it's tough to read, but it says "Power in your hands." I felt those quotes were speaking to me directly. Keep going. Keep searching. You'll find more. Never give up. I wrote the following when I came home from the trip. What I'm going to read is more of a diary entry. It's not very well organized, as I never really expected to share it with anyone. So I'll read it out loud to all of you. What a trip. Exceeded all expectations. Apart from fantastic drivers, tour guides, and hotels, the whole experience is one I have trouble describing. I came home feeling like I was on a high. We went and paid our respects to so many family members we never met. We saw where they lived, where they died, where they celebrated holidays, had bar mitzvahs, as well as funerals. We saw where they lived like animals, where they were tortured, murdered. Their lives were so horribly destroyed. We saw the suffering our people endured, how important the existence of Israel is. A part of me doesn't want this feeling to end. I don't want to fall back to my routine, so busy each day, focused on the near term. I find I haven't turned the radio on while driving in the car. I open the windows and enjoy the fresh air and peacefulness of quiet. I remember how peaceful that cemetery was, how much closer I feel to our relatives. I feel like I was given the opportunity to meet them and learn about their lives. I hope to go back. I wish I could do more to restore their memories, to restore the traditions and heritage of an entire population that existed and was destroyed. I miss them. So how did the search for the Torah conclude? It's hard to know exactly where the Torah is hidden or buried. I believe deep down that Torah is still in that cemetery today. There's an area in the back of the cemetery that's still overgrown and hasn't been cleaned yet. And in that back section, there's a World War I monument, as well as a small plot where children were buried. Additionally, originally at the entrance, you'll notice this small pile of bricks here. At the entrance was a pre-burial house. I imagine if they had buried the Torah, they would have done so in a location they could easily remember, and one that may have provided some cover while they were actually digging. These are the locations where I would start to search. However, to actually start digging would be an enormous endeavor. The ground is rock hard. Parts of the cemetery are still overgrown. I don't know if it's legal. I have thought that maybe if the Torah had its ornaments on it, a metal detector could be helpful. I've read about ground penetrating sonar, but who knows? Did they put it in a bag, wrap it in a tallis or a blanket? And after 80 years in the ground, what condition would it be in? Would it even be salvageable? I have not given up, although I'm at a bit of a dead end. However, as my wife Logan pointed out to me, maybe the search for the Torah was a search for something larger. For is the Torah not the greatest symbol of who we are? Maybe my search for the quote-unquote Torah was a pursuit of something deeper. My identity, my family history, the history of our people. And yes, Slavik did finish writing his book, and he mailed me a copy. On page 29, you will read about Zygmunt Litwok and see him pictured with his new bride, Genya. They are now forever remembered and recorded in the history of the Jews of Jiu-Jitsu. You guys can all see this after I'm done. Tonight, we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a site of mass murder, genocide, where an entire religion was nearly wiped off the face of the earth, where parents were pulled apart from their children, husbands away from their wives, millions murdered. There are two stories that we were told on our tour of Auschwitz that do not stop haunting me. I'll share them with you briefly. They're very upsetting. If you want to close your ears, I will not be insulted. One was the Nazi infatuation with identical twins. In one quote-unquote medical experiment, two identical twin boys, Jewish twin boys, were taken and held in separate rooms. In one room, they cut off the arm of one of the twins while he was wide awake. In the other room, they observed the other twin to see if he would show any signs or effects of the trauma his brother was undergoing. Another was the torture chambers we witnessed in Auschwitz. Jews were forced to crawl on the floor through a hatch into a chimney-like brick structure. They would force 4 or 5 Jews in at once to the point they could not sit. It was standing room only. Then they would lock the hatch and leave them there till they were all dead. They were buried alive while standing. How could such evil happen? Before Hitler, Germany was not a country of murderers and barbarians. As Nana once said, "Where did this happen to me? And at whose hands? Was it some primitive tribe of cannibals removed deep in some jungle away from the civilized world? No. It happened in Germany, the heart of the Western world, the breeding ground of Freud and Einstein, the home of our greatest art, literature, music, and science." She continued, "As I look around the world today, I see hatred in many parts of the world, and it troubles me. There are no limits to the cruelty people can inflict on others. There is still no limit on the kinds of suffering people cause each other. My message to tomorrow's children is that we must not only remember how the Holocaust ended, but how it began. It is critical that you pay attention to what is going on in the world so that nothing like the Holocaust ever happens to anyone again, anywhere in the world." As I recently read through copies I had found of Papa and Nana's speeches, I was taken by how relevant their words are today. Papa once wrote, "The words 'never forget' are often spoken. They mean two things to me. First, never forget the people that suffered and died for the only crime they committed. They were born Jews. And second, never forget means to me, never forget that it can happen again." We must not just teach about our history, but understand that such evil can happen again. We have to keep our eyes open and speak up against hatred, racism, and violence, regardless of which ethnicity, religion, or gender it affects. In a speech to the second generation in 1995, Nana said, "My focus tonight is on you, the second generation. For it is you and you alone who will keep our memory and the memory of the Eastern European culture alive. What we did not let Hitler kill was the beauty of Jewish life. What we all have in common is an obsession not to betray the dead we left behind or who left us behind. They were killed once. They must not be killed through forgetfulness. We remember, and what we remember, the world will remember, whether it wants to or not. Till the day we die, we will proclaim, we will inform, we will rip open our wounds and make sure that this dark chapter in mankind's history will not be swept under the collective rugs of the nations who stood by silently while millions died. And after we are gone, you, our children, will carry on and continue to pass it on to your children. In my eyes, you are the keepers of the flame, and this is quite a responsibility. We've always been taught never to forget. Never forget was a theme of our Jewish education. And we heard those two words come straight from the mouths of survivors. Never forget when we were shown a number tattooed on a forearm. Never forget stories of miraculous survival. Never forget names of mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers our loved ones had stolen from them. Never forget the sound of their beautiful Eastern European accent. The Holocaust is alive. It's there. It's not a story. It's not history. You can go see the camps and ghettos. You can see the mass graves. You can see the crematoriums. This trip brought to life the stories I heard growing up. I fear that saying never forget will not be enough for the next generation. We heard those two words from survivors, witnesses, but my generation's children will not. They will not have that direct connection we did when we heard eyewitness testimonies. Our children won't just learn by us telling them about the Holocaust. I feel they need to forge a personal connection with it. There needs to be a tangible or somatic component to Holocaust education. I now believe that after visiting Israel, visiting Poland should be a mandatory trip for Jewish children at least once, so that they can see these sites for themselves. As Nana said, we are now the keepers of the flame. So what can we do to ensure that the history of the Holocaust is not forgotten? I challenge each of you. Take some time and learn something new about the Holocaust. If your family was directly involved, dig into your own history. Take an hour or two and draw a family tree, or print out a map and label the towns your loved ones are from. If your family was not directly involved, you can learn about someone's story of survival, or about the history of a particular town, or about a righteous Gentile who risked their life to save the lives of others. Read, Google, watch videos, but most importantly, share what you've learned with others. Next year, I want one of you to tell me your new story. What did you learn about your heritage? Maybe you learned about a town someone was from, or what they did for a living, or what they like to do in their free time. Maybe you even discovered the name of a distant cousin. When you learn about your relatives, you will be celebrating their lives, their existence. You will learn about how they lived, not just how they died. When I sat down in my living room in Manhasset 2 years ago and started this project, I had no idea what I was embarking on. This entire talk has been on lessons I've learned over the past 2 years. Literally every single night I sat down to research this project, I learned something new about my family. I even found a picture online of Jewish laborers in the labor camp Gogolin, in which I'm nearly certain I see Papa standing in the back row. As I was preparing for this talk, I discovered an article written in The Voice in March of 1995, 25 years ago. The article was written as we neared the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. The author of the article was Yoni Litwok. She concludes, "We, the survivors, the witnesses, will talk about the Holocaust, teach it, and when we are not here anymore, our children and grandchildren will do it. Papa and Nana, I will try my best. Remember, Zachor, Gedenk." Thank you.
I don't want to chase anybody out of the field of cardiology, but if you want to develop a second career, it would be sharing the story with, as powerfully as you just did, Yoni. I did want to create an opportunity for people who might want to publicly pose some questions to Yoni, so that some of them may be of general interest.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the sonar technology. There's a lady who's a professor in Britain who's really on top of that. What, and they've used that in Podari in Lithuania. What is the possibility that you could get somebody to do that in the cemetery in Zygmunt?
I don't know. And actually, in the back of my head, I was actually hopeful that maybe by telling the story and sharing it with so many people, someone would offer some advice, because I'm a bit stuck, but that would be fantastic if you know some people. Because I've just read some general articles online where it's used for completely different.
They're doing a lot with it in the Holocaust graves and things like that.
Yeah. I'll get her name from you.
I'll
Sure.
have to look it up.
Okay.
I'll give you my email address.
Okay, perfect.
Dr. Yoni, thank
Yes,
you for
thanks.
this important presentation. Slavik, he was caretaking a cemetery in his own town.
Yep.
What brought him to Jiu-Jitsu?
I don't even know. Slavic is, it's hard to describe Slavic. He's just like an angel. Like, where did this guy even come from? They're close. I think they're about 20 minutes. It's the same geographic area. But Slavic's passion, what he likes to do, is to restore these Jewish communities. And if you become Facebook friends with him, you'll see that essentially 3-4 nights a week, Slavic is in a different town at a different memorial service, at a different event where they're talking about the Jewish communities that existed there. He's published numerous books about several towns in that part of Poland, and he just has this natural passion of restoring these communities. It's unbelievable. I don't think he receives enough awareness for what he does. I'm hopeful that Yad Vashem, or that someone becomes aware of just how much he's doing, because single-handedly, I mean, you see what he did in Jiu-Jitsu, and he's doing it throughout. I don't believe so.
Just an observation.
Yeah.
On a personal level, you may not have been able to save the Torah, but the Torah saved you.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to propose to you with utmost humility. I'm not qualified, but I'd like to propose. These Torahs are not of any use as Torah anymore. Their place is with the people that they serve. They should stay there.
Thank you. I've thought of that also.
It was theirs. Pray Torah.
Yeah.
Has Slavic ever visited America and any of the Holocaust memorial?
Do you remember if he was a...
He was in America.
I think he was in America once as a child, but not recently. In the other room, when you have cookies and coffee, I set up a table, a display of a number of documents that I put together from my grandparents. Slavic's book will be there as well, so please make sure you stop there. Yes?
Yoni, we talked earlier just briefly about the third generation. After doing this, which I know is not easy, any thoughts on how to pull others into, maybe not a trip, but
Yeah. it's hard. Like I said, I know in New York City there's a nonprofit, I forget their exact name, but it's a third generation group. Their main kind of goal is to train third generation people in how to provide a 10-minute talk on their own family history. And they're hopeful that by training people to be able to give this talk, all these people will go out to the community and to schools and be able to continue educating about the Holocaust. It's hard. I feel like there's so many people like myself in the third generation that know so much about our grandparents and take pride in our history, but we don't really know how to express that. And maybe by seeing other people of the third generation speaking, it will inspire them to share their story. I looked on YouTube and Google, I typed in like third generation Holocaust speech. There's absolutely nothing, zero, like nothing at all. So I feel like today with social media, if you made a 1 minute or 2 minute thing about this was my family, like hashtag third generation, something like that, that's how I envision it possibly.
Well, feel free to mention that to you know who.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, like, there are many Jews who didn't have parents in the Holocaust, who didn't experience anything. How can you promote this to them?
Yeah, it's different, and it's
Because this, you know, a lot of people here have family in the Holocaust, but then there's some that just never experienced what your family experienced. And it would be, it's a story that needs to get told to them as well.
right.
Yoni, in that sense, I'd like to publicly thank Alan Brooker, who was recording this
Yeah, that's
now,
true.
so that you will not have to give up the practice of medicine to go on the lecture circuit. Hopefully, this beautiful presentation will be recycled many, many times and to an ever wider audience.
I think just to answer your question, though, somehow tying it to what's going on today, I mean, just seeing what's going on in our neck of the woods might be a way to connect with those who didn't have family involved in the Holocaust, say this was then, but just like Papa and Nana's speeches, look what's happening now. So maybe that's how you can reach those that weren't personally affected.
Well, I'd like to see it go to, you know, other Jewish organizations and people who are not Holocaust.
Yeah.
What I have to say is not really a question, it's more a statement. And I'm very, very moved by this presentation. And I, like you, I have a shared cemetery experience when I went back to Vienna to find my family's graves. And you articulated to me that I could never, ever put into words. And I really thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Family had suggested to me that, and of course, obviously, refreshments in just a few minutes will be a shared space for anybody who wanted to have individual follow-up questions with Yoni. I just have to mention, just a warm memory, when I first arrived here in the summer of 2003, my predecessor, Rabbi Shore of blessed memory, left me a completely clean desk, with one exception, were the notes you had made for your grandfather's unveiling. I have no idea what significance to attach that, but for posterity I recorded. And in keeping with a suggestion of the family, since they marked every leg of that journey with an El Malei Rachamim, to remember those people who were in the cemeteries that they visited, I felt that we could do the same. And so I'll ask that you rise for a closing special El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Asfina, B'ma'alot Doshim U'Torim K'Zohar HaRakia Mazhirim Et Nishmot Kol Acheinu B'nei Yisrael Anashim, Nashim V'Taf Shenitbechu V'Shenetneku V'Shenisrafu V'Shenehergu B'Gan Eden Tehem Menuchatam Ana Bal Rachamim Hastirem B'Seter Knafecha Li'olamim U'Tzror B'Tzror HaChayim Et Nishmotehem Adonai hu nachalatam v'yanuchu b'shalom al mishkavotehem v'nomar amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the souls of all of our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, whose lives were snuffed out by the Nazi hordes. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. And after the refreshments in the Mishan Hall, courtesy of the Litwok family, we do offer you the opportunity at 8:30 for the Ma'ariv service that will be taking place.
I just wanted
Thank you
to
again.
thank, I have a list to thank you, Logan, my parents, my in-laws, Slavic, of course, Hannes, a German friend of mine who translated all the documents you'll see outside. And our tour was through Real Poland Tours that did a personalized, fantastic tour of Poland. So if you ever consider a trip, I would go with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoni.
Just to make sure, yeah, I think anybody who came probably covered here.
Let the